Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku had to protect humanity from Quirk mutations. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The night air over Muzutopha was cool and carried the scent of late-blooming cherry blossoms and the faint, electric tang of the city itself. For Izuku Midoriya, now 5 years into his professional career and a solid fixture in the nation's top 10 hero rankings, this scent was as familiar and comforting as the worn fabric of his own costume. He hovered 1,000 feet above the glittering tapestry of streets and buildings, the gentle thrum of one for all a steady, reassuring heartbeat within him. Float, once a wild and unpredictable bucking bronco of a Quirk, was now as natural as breathing, a silent engine holding him aloft in the velvet dark. His call sign, Deku, had long since shed its playground cruelty. It was a banner now, a name that made children cheer and villains pause. He wore it with a quiet pride that still felt surreal at times. The frantic, stammering boy was still there, tucked away in the core of his being, but he was shielded by layers of hard-won confidence, sinewy muscle, and the countless scars, both visible and invisible, that came with the job. His patrol route was a familiar waltz. He'd arc over the bustling downtown district, his senses, both natural and enhanced by danger sense, sifting through the cacophony of city life. Danger sense had matured beyond a simple alarm bell for incoming attacks. It was more like a complex sensory organ, a low-grade thrum that spiked with malice or intent. Tonight, it was blissfully quiet, a gentle hum that spoke of a city at peace. He used black whip in casual, practice motions, not for combat, but for utility. A black tendril would snap out to catch a child's dropped balloon before it could drift away. Another would secure a wobbly sign atop a noodle shop battered by the day's wind. These small acts were the bedrock of his heroism, the moments he cherished more than any high-stakes battle. He was no longer just All Might's successor. He was his own hero. A hero who could finally enjoy a moment of peace. "He's so proud of you, you know," Nana Shimura's voice echoed softly in the quiet nexus of his mind. A warm and welcome presence. The vestiges were a constant counsel now, their voices less like intrusive ghosts and more like the accumulated wisdom of his own lineage. Izuku smiled, a genuine, unburdened expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I know," he thought back, his gaze sweeping over the city lights. "I just wish he could be out here to see it." All Might's health was stable but fragile. His time in his muscle form was measured in mere seconds, a flickering ember of his former glory. He served now as a mentor, a strategist, a living symbol. But the patrols, the feeling of the wind in his hair, those were things Izuku did for both of them now. Peace is a prize to be guarded, not a state to be expected, the second user's gruff voice rumbled, a perpetual reminder of the vigilance required. "Right," Izuku murmured aloud, his smile tightening into a look of focus. "Can't get complacent." It was then that his calms crackled to life, the calm voice of his agency operator a stark contrast to the sudden, sharp spike in his danger sense. "Deku report. We have a public disturbance call in the Yanagi ward, Sector 3. Multiple civilian reports. Sounds like a villain with a powerful hydrokinetic quirk going rampant." "On my way," Izuku replied, his body already moving. He angled downward, engaging one for all at 25%. Green lightning crackled around him, not as a wild storm, but as a controlled, focused corona of power. The city became a blur as he rocketed towards the designated sector, the peace of the night shattered. But something was wrong. Danger sense wasn't just spiking, it was screaming. It wasn't the clean, sharp stab of incoming danger or malicious intent. This was a messy, chaotic, agonizing throb, a feeling of deep-seated wrongness that made the hairs on his arms stand up and a cold dread seep into his stomach. It felt less like a villain attack and more like a natural disaster condensed into a single point. He arrived in under a minute. The scene was worse than he could have imagined. It wasn't a battle. It was a nightmare. Yanagi Ward Sector 3 was a quiet, residential area of small apartment buildings and local shops. The disturbance was centered in a small plaza, the kind with a fountain and a few stone benches. Or at least, there had been a fountain. Now, the epicenter was a massive, pulsating sphere of water, easily 15 feet in diameter. It wasn't clear, sparkling water. It was murky, churning, and visibly, impossibly boiling. Steam billowed from its surface in thick, choking clouds that smelled of ozone and something else, something metallic and organic, like cooked meat. The sphere wasn't static. It bulged and warped, held together by some unseen, immense pressure. The ground around it was soaked, and the air was humid and oppressively hot. Police had formed a perimeter, their faces pale and slick with sweat, their expressions a mixture of terror and bewilderment. They weren't engaging. They were just trying to keep terrified onlookers from getting too close. "What's the situation?" Deku demanded as he landed, his boots sinking slightly into the waterlogged pavement. A grizzled police sergeant, a man who looked like he'd seen everything, just pointed a trembling finger. "God, I don't know, Deku. 1 minute this guy, a civilian, Kenji Tanaka, works at the local water treatment plant, is just walking home. The next this," and then Deku saw him. Inside the churning orb of boiling water, suspended in the very center like a fly in amber, was a man. His body was contorted at an unnatural angle, limbs bent in ways they weren't meant to go. His mouth was open in a silent, unending scream, bubbles streaming from his lips. But it was the sound that truly cemented the horror. It wasn't a roar of villainous power or a cry of malicious glee. It was a high, keening wail of pure, undiluted agony. It was the sound of a creature being torn apart from the inside out. This wasn't malice. It was torment. "He's not attacking," Deku breathed, his hero-analyst's brain struggling to process the scene. "He's trapped. His own quirk is doing this to him." The man's quirk, hydrokinesis, was supposed to be minor. The police report would later show he could barely fill a glass from a few feet away. But now, it was drawing water from the ruptured fountain, from the pipes beneath the street, from the very humidity in the air, compressing it into a high-pressure prison of scalding liquid. Deku watched in abject horror as a fresh wave of agony seized the man. The water cocoon convulsed violently. Through the distorted, superheated liquid, Izuku could see the man's skin turning translucent and waxy, his veins glowing with a terrifying blue-white light, as if they were filled with plasma instead of blood. There was a sickening, wet crunching sound that carried even over the roar of the water, the sound of his bones warping under the strain. His danger sense was a roaring fire in his skull, screaming wrong, wrong, wrong. This wasn't a person to be fought. This was a victim to be saved. But how? His first instinct, the instinct honed by 1,000 battles, was to smash. A 45% Detroit smash could shatter the water sphere, freeing the man. But his mind raced, calculating the consequences in a split second. The sphere was boiling. The pressure had to be immense. Shattering it wouldn't be a release. It would be a steam explosion. It would flash boil the man at the center and scald everyone within a 100-foot radius. Civilians, police, himself. He couldn't risk it. He needed to think. He needed a different approach. One for all is not just for smashing. 9th. Yoichi Shigaraki's calm voice was a lifeline in the chaos of his thoughts. It is a tool. Versatile. Adaptable. Deku's eyes darted around, his mind a flurry of quirk combinations. Black Whip? Could it pierce the sphere? Maybe, but the force required might rupture it anyway. The intense heat could even damage the tendrils. Smoke screen? Useless. Fa gene? He had nothing to build kinetic energy off of without direct contact. His gaze fell upon the warping, bulging surface of the water sphere. It was chaotic, unpredictable. But what if he could change its properties? What if he could fight the chaos itself? The sixth user's quirk, gearshift, surfaced in his mind. The power to alter the speed of an object he touched, to ignore the laws of inertia. He had trained relentlessly with it, learning to apply it to himself for bursts of incredible speed, or to projectiles to turn a simple stone into a hypersonic bullet. But he had never tried to use it on something amorphous, something without a solid state. Like a liquid. It was a crazy, desperate idea. But it was the only one he had that didn't involve catastrophic force. Everyone, back up. Get behind the buildings. Now! Deku roared, his voice cutting through the panic. The police, grateful for a clear order from a top hero, began herding the few remaining civilians away. Deku took a deep breath, focusing his will. He activated float, lifting himself 30 feet into the air, directly above the pulsating orb. Green lightning flared around him as he channeled power, not into his limbs for a strike, but into his very being, preparing for the delicate, monumental task ahead. He extended his hands, palms down, towards the boiling prison. Gear shift, low gear, he whispered, the words a prayer. He wasn't touching the man. He was targeting the water. The quirk took hold. The effect was instantaneous and bizarre. The roiling, chaotic surface of the sphere didn't freeze, but it began to move with a thick, syrupy slowness. The violent churning smoothed into a lazy, sluggish swirl. The immense pressure was still there, but the chaotic kinetic energy within it was being forcibly throttled. It was like trying to wrestle a hurricane into a jar. The strain on Deku was immense. He felt like he was mentally pushing against a tectonic plate. His muscles screamed in protest, sweat beading on his forehead and stinging his eyes. One for All was pouring into gearshift, fueling its conceptual power. He could feel the quirk's immense energy drain, the sheer force of what required to impose order on the chaos of another man's rampaging quirk. It's working, he gritted out, his arms trembling. With the water's motion suppressed, he saw his chance. Black whip! Dozens of sleek black tendrils erupted from his arms. They weren't lashing out, they were controlled, precise. They plunged into the now viscous surface of the water. The heat was still incredible, and steam hissed where the energy constructs made contact, but they held firm. Instead of trying to pull the man out, which could tear him apart, Deku did the opposite. He used the tendrils like surgical tools, like 1,000 fingers peeling an orange. He anchored some to nearby lampposts and the edges of buildings, then began to slowly, carefully pull the sphere apart, layer by layer. He siphoned the sluggish, superheated water away from the core, flinging it in controlled arcs into the empty street where it vaporized on contact with the cool asphalt. The process was agonizingly slow. The man inside was still screaming, a muffled, gurgling sound that would haunt Deku's nightmares for years to come. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last layer of water was peeled away. The man, Kenji Tanaka, fell. Deku was already there, catching him before he hit the ground. He cradled the man's body, and a wave of nausea washed over him. Tanaka's body was a horrifying landscape of trauma. His skin was pale and puckered, like it had been parboiled, and in places, it had a strange, semi-translucent quality. His limbs were twisted at grotesque angles, the bones clearly broken and reset in the wrong positions by the immense pressure. But the worst part was his eyes. They were wide open, staring at nothing, the vibrant life they once held extinguished. He was breathing, a shallow, rattling gasp, but the man, the person, was gone. He was a catatonic shell. Deku gently laid him down as paramedics, now able to approach, rushed in with a specialized stretcher. He could only watch, his own body aching and drained, as they hooked Tanaka up to monitors and carefully stabilized his broken limbs. The grizzled police sergeant approached him again, his face ashen. What was that, Deku? I've seen some nasty quirk accidents, but never anything like this. Deku looked from the catatonic man being loaded into the ambulance to his own trembling hands. He had won. He had saved him, technically. But this felt nothing like a victory. I don't know, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I really don't know. 2 hours later, Izuku stood in the sterile white corridor of Mutations General Hospital, the antiseptic smell doing little to mask the phantom scent of steam and burnt ozone in his memory. His hero costume was gone, replaced by a simple t-shirt and sweats provided by the hospital staff. He had been checked over, minor energy exhaustion, first-degree steam burns on his forearms, but his mind was far from fine. Through a reinforced window, he watched a team of the country's top quirk specialists and doctors working on Kenji Tanaka. The man was in a medically induced coma, his body a canvas of inexplicable biological horror. His quirk factor has gone haywire, a woman's voice said from beside him. Izuku turned. It was Director Kajiwara of the Hero Public Safety Commission. She was a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes, an impeccably tailored suit, and an aura of cold, pragmatic authority. She held a data slate, her gaze fixed on the room. Director, Izuku acknowledged, his voice flat. The initial analysis is unprecedented, she continued, her tone clinical. It's not just that his quirk went out of control. It's rewriting him. The hydrokinesis factor seems to have started integrating itself directly into his cellular structure. His mitochondrial DNA is being overwritten. His body isn't just producing an effect anymore, it's becoming the effect. We're seeing water molecules bonded at a quantum level with his cell membranes. Izuku felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. It's consuming him. Aptly put, Kajiwara said, finally looking at him. Her expression wasn't unkind, but it was devoid of the raw horror Izuku felt. It was the look of a problem solver facing a complex variable. You did well, Deku. Your unconventional solution prevented a massive steam explosion and significant collateral damage. The Commission is impressed. He's a catatonic wreck whose body is turning into water, Izuku shot back, his frustration boiling over. I wouldn't call that a success. It's a containment, she corrected smoothly. And that is the priority right now. This incident is to be classified level 7. The official story will be a villain attack using an unknown gas to trigger a quirk malfunction. The villain escaped. Tanaka is a tragic victim. The details of his condition are not to be made public. Izuku stared at her, aghast. You want to cover it up? People need to know. What if this happens to someone else? We need to warn them, find a cause, a cure, and incite mass panic? Kajiwara's voice sharpened. Hero Deku, consider the implications. There are over 100 million people in Japan with quirks. What do you think will happen if we announce that, at any moment, their own innate power could spontaneously decide to eat them alive? That the gift that defines our society is also a potential time bomb? It would be chaos. People would become terrified of their own bodies, of their children, of their neighbors. Trust in the hero system, in society itself, would collapse. She had a point, a cold, logical, terrifying point. But it grated against every fiber of his being. So we just lie? We let this man suffer in secret, and pretend it's not happening? We investigate, she countered, her gaze softening slightly. Quietly. We've already begun assembling a research team. We're calling the phenomenon quirk singularity decay. QSD. It gives it a name, makes it a manageable problem to be studied. Your report, specifically your description of how your danger sense reacted, will be invaluable. For now your duty, and the Commission's duty, is to maintain order. Let the scientists handle the science. You handle the heroics. She gave him a curt, dismissive nod and walked away, her heels clicking decisively on the linoleum floor. Izuku was left staring at Tanaka's inert form, feeling more powerless than he had in years. He had fought all for one, stared down Shigaraki at his most monstrous, and emerged victorious. But he didn't know how to fight a lie. He didn't know how to punch a biological reality. Sleep offered no escape. His small apartment, usually a sanctuary of quiet and solitude, felt like a cage. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Kenji Tanaka's face, the silent scream, the vacant eyes. He heard the wet crunch of warping bone. He finally gave up on rest around 3 a.m., sitting cross-legged on his floor, trying to meditate, to find some center in the swirling vortex of his thoughts. The feeling of wrongness from his danger sense lingered, a phantom limb he could still feel aching. Frustrated, he reached inward, not for power, but for counsel. Guys, I need you. The world dissolved. The familiar, stardusted void of the vestige realm enveloped him. But it, too, was different tonight. The silent, peaceful darkness was gone. In its place was a low, resonant hum, a dissonant chord that seemed to vibrate through the very fabric of this mental space. The vestiges were all there, their forms clearer and more solid than ever, but their usual calm was replaced with a shared, profound unease. Yoichi Shigaraki, the first user, drifted forward. His usual expression of gentle melancholy was etched with a deep, ancient sorrow. You feel it too, Ninth, he stated, his voice a soft rustle of dry leaves. The hum. The tremor in the world. What is it? Izuku asked, his voice pleading. What happened to that man? It was Nana Shimura who answered first, her form shimmering as she placed a ghostly hand on his shoulder. Izuku, it's starting. The thing that Dr. Garaki theorized. The thing we've all feared. The quirk singularity, Haikyud Shinomori, the fourth user, finished, his voice grim. His form was the most transparent of them all, a constant reminder of how One for All had worn his body down, a miniature version of the very horror Izuku had just witnessed. But the theory was wrong. It's not about quirks becoming too powerful, too complex. It's a decay. A rejection. Yoichi raised a hand, and the hum in the vestige world seemed to intensify. Quirks were an anomaly. 9th. A sudden, violent tear in the fabric of human genetics. For generations, the human body has adapted, building a fragile truce with these parasitic factors. But the truce is ending. The host is beginning to reject the parasite. The quirk factor, in a desperate act of self-preservation, is fighting back. It's not trying to work with the body anymore. It's trying to replace it. A wave of understanding, cold and terrible, washed over Izuku. Kajiwara's words echoed in his mind. His body isn't just producing an effect anymore, it's becoming the effect. Quirk singularity decay, Izuku whispered, the name tasting like ash. A fitting term, the second user grunted, his arms crossed, his face a mask of grim severity. We can feel it through One for All. This quirk, being a unique construct passed from person to person, is more stable. It acts like an antenna. We can feel the resonance of every quirk on the planet, and right now, they are screaming. The hum you feel is the prelude to a storm. So that man. Tanaka, he was the first? Izuku asked, dreading the answer. Yoichi shook his head slowly. He was the first one you saw. The first tremor of the earthquake. But he will not be the last. The weight of the revelation was crushing. This wasn't a villain. This wasn't something he could fight with his fists. It was a biological apocalypse unfolding in slow motion. The HPSC's plan to cover it up suddenly seemed not just pragmatic, but monumentally foolish. It was like trying to hide a tsunami by telling people not to look at the ocean. What do I do? Izuku's voice was small, the voice of the boy he used to be, lost and terrified. How can I fight this? How can I save everyone if their own bodies are the enemy? Nana knelt before him, her spectral form looking him directly in the eyes. Her expression was full of love, but also a fierce strength. The same way you always have, Izuku. You don't give up. You find a way. Smashing won't solve this. Your heart, your mind, your refusal to sacrifice a single life, that is your greatest weapon. You are not just the wielder of One for All. You are its conscience. You must be the symbol of hope, not just against villains, but against despair itself. The vestige world began to fade, the hum receding but not disappearing. Izuku felt himself returning to his apartment, the weight of their words settling upon him like a shroud. He was alone, but not truly. He was armed with a terrible knowledge. He stood up, his body thrumming with a nervous, anxious energy. He walked to his window and looked out at the city, still glittering, still seemingly at peace. But now he saw it differently. He didn't see a collection of buildings and lights. He saw millions of tiny, flickering flames, the quirks of every person, and he imagined them sputtering, threatening to flare up and consume their hosts. His danger sense was no longer a comfort. It was a curse, a constant reminder of the fragility of it all. Just as the first hints of dawn began to paint the eastern sky in shades of gray and lavender, his personal terminal chimed with a high-priority alert. It was a direct dispatch from the HPSC's Emergency Command Center, bypassing his agency. His blood ran cold. He snatched the terminal. The message was short, clinical, and utterly terrifying. Hero DKU. Immediate deployment required. 2 new incidents flagged. Location, Yanagi Ward, Sector 5. Details, energy signatures consistent with Tanaka, Kenji incident. Multiple reports of civilians exhibiting spontaneous, uncontrolled quirk manifestations. A second line of text blinked onto the screen, a frantic addendum from a panicked field officer. They're not attacking. They're screaming. Dear God, it looks like they're melting. Izuku stared at the screen, his knuckles white as he gripped the terminal. The hum from the vestige world was gone, but he could almost hear it now in the real world, a faint, rising thrum beneath the sounds of the waking city. The tremor was over. The earthquake had begun. For 36 hours, the city held its breath. Director Kajiwara's information lockdown was brutally efficient. The official narrative was deployed with the precision of a military operation, an isolated villain attack in Yanagi Ward, a tragic quirk overload induced by an unknown chemical agent. Kenji Tanaka was a name whispered in hospital corridors, a classified file on a secure server. The HPSC machine, for a time, succeeded in pressing a lid onto a boiling pot. But in the age of omnipresent cameras and instantaneous data sharing, lids were made of glass. The cover-up shattered on the second day. It didn't come from an official leak, or a daring investigative journalist. It came, as most modern horrors do, from a grainy, vertically shot video uploaded to ClipTalk from an anonymous account named TruthSeeker99. The video was titled, Hero Asked About What Are They Hiding? Musita for Incident 4. Izuku saw it when Uraraka sent him the link with a simple, frantic message. Izuku, have you seen this? He was in his agency's small, private training gym, trying to work off the nervous energy that had been thrumming under his skin since the hospital. He had punched a reinforced training dummy until his knuckles were raw, but the image of Tanaka's vacant eyes remained seared into his mind. He clicked the link, and his world tilted on its axis. The video was shaky, clearly filmed from a rooftop several blocks away, the zoom pushed to its digital, pixelated limit. It showed a wide intersection in broad daylight. The timestamp indicated it was from that morning. At first, it looked like a standard villain fight. A figure, vaguely recognizable in a sky blue and white costume, was at the center of a chaotic scene. It was Elastaba, a mid-tier hero with a simple but effective elasticity quirk. He was known for his cheerful demeanor and his specialization in nonviolent restraints and civilian rescue. A hero who once made the news for stretching 30 stories to rescue a child's pet chameleon. But he wasn't fighting anyone. He was the disaster. His body, his friendly, familiar form, was coming apart. It wasn't the clean, cartoonish stretch of his quirk. It was a grotesque, biological mutiny. His limbs were elongating into gruesome, twitching tendrils of flesh and bone, whipping around and smashing into storefronts and cars. One arm had split into 3 separate, ropey appendages, each ending in a mess of what looked like elongated fingers. His torso was a heaving, undulating mass, his costume tearing away to reveal skin that wept a clear, viscous fluid. The video's microphone picked up the sound, not the triumphant shouts of a hero, but a constant, gurgling scream of agony, punctuated by wet, tearing noises as his own body continued to unravel. He wasn't attacking. He was flailing. He was a drowning man, and the ocean was his own biology. Heroes arrived on screen, Endeavor, Mirko, Crust, but their movements were hesitant. They weren't engaging a villain. They were facing a biological horror. The video ended abruptly as a burst of blue flame from Endeavor obscured the camera's view. Izuku's phone almost slipped from his trembling hand. He scrolled down, his heart pounding a sick, heavy rhythm against his ribs. The comments section was a wildfire of terror. OMG, is that real? That's not Elastabel. That's a monster. My cousin lives near Yanagi Ward. Said something weird happened there 2 days ago too. Police covered it up. The news is silent. Why is the news silent? I have a stretching quirk, am I going to? Anxious face with sweat. Then he saw the word, coined in the dark recesses of some fringe internet forum, and now spreading like a virus itself. Aberration. It was a cold, clinical, dehumanizing word. A word for something that was no longer human. Within hours, aberration and quirk decay were trending. The HPSC's carefully constructed dam had burst, and a tidal wave of public fear was surging through the cracks. The contagion wasn't just biological, it was social. For the first time since the dawn of quirks, people weren't afraid of villains. They were afraid of themselves. Stories began to crop up everywhere. A woman whose minor pyrokinesis quirk caused her hands to heat up to searing temperatures uncontrollably. A man whose levitation quirk now only worked on his internal organs, causing him excruciating pain. Most were psychosomatic, born of sheer panic. But some, Izuku knew with a chilling certainty, were real. They were the aftershocks of the first tremor. The emergency briefing was held in a place Izuku had never been, the HPSC's Sub-Level 7 Strategic Command Center. It was a cold, circular room deep beneath the Commission's headquarters, bathed in the sterile blue light of holographic displays. The air was chilled and tasted of recycled oxygen. On the main screen was a map of Japan, dotted with 3 ominous, blinking red markers. Yanagi Ward. Elastaba's intersection. And a new one, in the neighboring prefecture. Present were Director Kajiwara, a grim-faced endeavor whose flames seemed to burn with a nervous, agitated intensity, and a surprisingly subdued Hawks, his wings held tightly against his back. Izuku stood slightly apart from them, the youthful energy that usually surrounded him replaced by a heavy, somber aura. The situation is escalating, Kajiwara began, her voice cutting through the tense silence. The viral video of the Elastaba incident has made containment of information impossible. Public panic is our primary threat. We need a unified front and a decisive protocol. Endeavor slammed a gauntlet fist onto the metal briefing table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The protocol is simple. These aberrations are biological threats. They are unpredictable, they cause massive collateral damage, and their very existence incites terror. They are no longer the people they were. They are a contagion. We excise the infection before it kills the host nation. Excise? Izuku's voice was dangerously quiet. You mean kill them? Endeavor turned to him, his turquoise eyes blazing. His usual arrogance was supplanted by a harsh, brutal pragmatism. I mean neutralize the threat. If that requires lethal force, then yes. We are heroes, Deku. Our job is to protect the greatest number of people. We make the hard choices so civilians don't have to. Would you rather we stand by and watch one of these things tear through a packed shopping mall while we try to talk it down? They are not things. Izuku shot back, his own power beginning to thrum beneath his skin, green sparks dancing at his fingertips. They are victims. Elastaboy spent 10 years protecting this city. Kenji Tanaka was a father. They are in agony, and you're talking about them like they're rabid dogs to be put down. It's a more apt comparison than you think, Hawks interjected, his voice smooth and calm, a layer of oil on roiling water. He pushed himself off the wall he'd been leaning against. Let's be logical. We don't have a cure. We don't even have a reliable method of sedation that works on all Quirk types. Your method with Tanaka was impressive, Deku, a real miracle of improvisation. But can you be at every single outbreak? Can you custom tailor a non-lethal solution for a man who is exploding, or turning into acid, or warping gravity around him? Logistically, it's impossible. He gestured to the main screen. The new protocol, Protocol Chimera, is being drafted. Identified aberrations are to be isolated. If isolation is not possible, containment is authorized. If containment fails, or if the aberration poses an immediate and catastrophic threat to public safety, neutralization is authorized. It's a ladder of escalation. It's clean. It's efficient. It gives heroes on the ground a clear set of rules. Izuku stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief. A clear set of rules for executing people who are sick. It's not that simple, Deku, Hawks sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's about stability. If the public sees us hesitating, if they see us failing to stop these events, they lose faith. Not just in us, but in everything. The whole system comes crashing down. Sometimes, preserving the peace means making a terrible choice in the dark so everyone else can live in the light. That's the Commission's rhetoric, Hawks, not yours, Izuku said, his voice laced with disappointment. Endeavor stepped forward, his immense height casting a shadow over Izuku. You're still a child, Deku. You see the world in black and white, save everyone or fail. But the real world is gray. It's about triage. It's about choosing the lesser of two evils. When I fought that Hyenomu, if I had hesitated, hundreds would have died. This is the same principle, on a biological scale. The mention of triage, of choosing who to save, struck a raw nerve. It was the antithesis of everything Izuku stood for. It was the philosophy of a world without a symbol of peace. No, Izuku said, his voice firm, unwavering. It's not the same. A Nomu is a weapon. A person suffering from QSD is a patient. We're heroes. We save people. All of them. If we start deciding who is worth saving and who is a necessary sacrifice, we're no better than the villains we fight. A heavy silence fell over the room. Kajiwara watched the exchange with cold, analytical eyes. Endeavor looked at Deku not with anger, but with a strange, almost pitying frustration. Hawks simply looked tired. In that moment, Izuku felt a profound sense of isolation. He was standing on one side of a moral chasm, and the most powerful heroes in the country were on the other. The protocol will be finalized and distributed by 1800 hours, Kajiwara announced, her tone leaving no room for argument. Your compliance is expected. Dismissed. Izuku turned and walked out of the room without another word, the sterile blue light feeling like the cold of a morgue. The one person he could talk to, the one person who might understand, lived in the quiet, secure teachers' dorms at UA High. The school was a fortress of calm in a world spiraling into panic. He found Toshinori Yagi sitting on the veranda of his apartment, wrapped in a thick blanket despite the mild afternoon, sipping a cup of tea. He looked friendlier than ever, a scarecrow silhouette against the bright sky. He turned as Izuku approached, his skeletal face breaking into a weak smile that didn't quite reach his sunken eyes. Young Midoriya, he said, his voice a dry rasp. I saw the news. Or rather, what's not on the news? I saw the video. Izuku pulled up a chair, the tension in his shoulders making him feel 100 years old. They're calling it Protocol Chimera. They're going to kill them, All Might. They're going to authorize heroes to use lethal force on victims. Toshinori was silent for a long moment, staring into his teacup. When I was the symbol of peace, he began slowly, his voice heavy with memory, the world was simpler. There were good people, and there were villains. The villains made a choice to do harm. The solution, crude as it may sound, was to be stronger than them. To stand as an unbreakable shield, a powerful sword. I could punch my problems. I punched All for One until he was a broken wreck in the bottom of a prison. I punched Enoma so hard I changed the weather. He looked up, and the sadness in his eyes was a physical blow. But how do you punch this, my boy? How do you punch a disease that wears a human face? I fought monsters of malice, not monsters of tragedy. I confess. I don't know what I would do. My methods are useless here. The admission, coming from the man who had been his son, his entire world, was devastating. If All Might didn't have the answer, who could? They told me I was a child, Izuku said, his voice cracking slightly. That I don't understand Tria. That I have to choose. No, Toshinori said, his voice suddenly gaining a spark of its old fire. He reached out, his bony, trembling hand landing on Izuku's shoulder. That is the one thing you must never do. Your belief, that everyone is worth saving, is not a childish fantasy, Izuku. It is the very soul of heroism. It is the core of One for All. It is the light that I almost lost, and that you reignited in the world. He coughed, a racking, painful sound, but his grip on Izuku's shoulder tightened. This will be your hardest fight. Not against the villain's power, but against the world's despair. It will test your spirit more than any physical blow. They are worried about saving the system. You must worry about saving its soul. But be careful, my boy. His voice dropped to a whisper. This burden, trying to save everyone from themselves, it could break you in a way no villain ever could. Don't lose yourself in the process. Izuku looked at his mentor, at this fragile man who had held the world on his shoulders, and felt a surge of grim determination. He wasn't a child. He was a hero, and his path was clear, even if he had to walk it alone. I won't, Izuku promised, his voice thick with emotion. I won't let them become monsters. And I won't become one myself. The call came just after dusk. Another QSD event. A woman in a crowded subway station. Deku was there in 90 seconds, the wind screaming past his ears. The station was pure chaos. People were stampeding for the exits, their screams echoing off the tiled walls. The air was thick with something that glittered, a beautiful and deadly cloud of shimmering particles. At the center of it, on the main platform, was a young woman in a simple office dress. She was on her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Her quirk, according to the frantic, fragmented police reports, was called pixie dust, a harmless vanity quirk that let her emit sparkling, glitter-like particles from her skin. Now, it was a weapon of mass destruction. The particles were no longer soft glitter. They were razor-sharp, crystalline flecks, like microscopic shards of glass. They swirled around her in a dense, lethal vortex, shredding anything they touched. The station's metal benches were scarred with millions of tiny cuts, the advertisements on the walls were flayed into ribbons, and a pool of blood on the platform suggested a civilian had gotten too close. The woman was weeping, her hands pressed to her face. "I'm sorry," she wailed, her voice lost in the hurricane of her own power. "Make it stop. Please, make it stop." This was it. The test of his conviction. "Everyone, get out!" Deku roared, his voice amplified by One for All. He landed on the platform between the woman and the last few fleeing civilians. He didn't have time for a complex plan. He became a shield. He stood his ground, letting the storm of crystalline shrapnel wash over him. His costume, a state-of-the-art polymer blend, began to fray and tear almost instantly. Thousands of tiny, stinging cuts opened up on his arms, his chest, his face. It felt like being sandblasted. He gritted his teeth against the pain, his eyes fixed on the weeping woman. Her eyes were wide with terror, pleading with him even as her body tried to tear him to shreds. Contain, don't crush. Save, don't strike. Endeavor's method would be a single, precise jet of flame to incinerate her. Clean, efficient, and an utter moral failure. Izuku wouldn't allow it. He pushed off the ground with float, rising above the deadliest part of the vortex. The shrapnel still pelted him, but he could think more clearly up here. He saw the pattern, a 20-foot radius of pure destruction, centered on her. "Black Whip!" he commanded, but he didn't send out lashing tendrils. This required finesse. Dozens of strands of black energy emerged from his back and arms, not as whips, but as threads. He began to weave them, his movements precise and controlled despite the pain. He was a spider creating a web, a weaver at a loom. He wove a sphere, a flexible, multi-layered cocoon in the air above her. The hard part was getting it around her without touching her, without the force of it injuring her. He took a deep breath, channeling One for All into Black Whip, making the construct both incredibly strong and impossibly gentle. Then he dropped it. The energy net fell over her like a shroud. The instant it made contact with the shrapnel storm, a deafening noise filled the station, the sound of a billion tiny blades striking the energy construct. The Black Whip cocoon held, but it vibrated violently under the strain. Izuku guided it, molding it with his will, wrapping it tighter and tighter around her, not to crush, but to contain. He left a pocket of air, ensuring she could breathe, but compressed the vortex of blades into a space no bigger than a phone booth. The storm was caged. The woman collapsed inside the dark sphere, her sobs the only sound other than the high-pitched pinging of crystals against the inside of their prison. Izuku landed, his body a mess of shallow cuts, his costume in tatters. He was breathing heavily, not just from the exertion, but from the sheer emotional and mental weight of the last 2 minutes. He had done it. He had saved her. He had saved the civilians. He had proven it was possible. But as the sirens grew louder and the telltale shimmer of HPSC containment shields appeared at the station entrance, a profound exhaustion settled over him. The sanitizer squads, clad in white biohazard suits, moved in. They didn't see the crying woman inside. They saw a contained anomaly. They prepared a heavy magnetic cradle to transport the entire Black Whip cocoon, treating it like a piece of live ordnance. Izuku watched them work, his own green lightning flickering out. He looked at his hands, raw and bleeding. They were tools of immense power, capable of leveling cities or, with enough care, caging a storm without harming the person at its center. But the fight had drained him more than any battle with Shigaraki. Because he hadn't been fighting a villain. He'd been fighting a tragedy. He had contained her. But he hadn't cured her. He hadn't stopped her suffering, only paused it. This wasn't a sustainable solution. He couldn't be everywhere at once, weaving custom cages for every soul whose quirk turned against them. Restraint was just a bandage on a festering, mortal wound. As the HPSC team loaded the humming black sphere onto a transport vehicle, Izuku knew with absolute, soul-crushing certainty that this was not a war he could win by fighting. He could restrain 100, 1,000 aberrations, and it wouldn't matter. The only true victory, the only way to uphold his promise to save everyone, was to find a cure. And he knew, with that same chilling certainty, that the HPSC, with their pragmatic protocols and their acceptable losses, would not be the ones to find it. He was truly alone in this. And his real mission was just beginning. The city had a fever. It was a low-grade, simmering anxiety that clung to the air like humidity, making every interaction sticky with suspicion. In the 48 hours since the Elastaba video had gone viral, Muzutafa had transformed. The vibrant, bustling metropolis Izuku loved had become a city of averted gazes and tightened grips. On the subway, people gave each other a wide berth, flinching at a sudden cough or sneeze. A child activating a harmless emission quirk to make flowers bloom in her palm earned her a terrified shriek from a nearby commuter, who scrambled away as if the girl had pulled a knife. The word aberration had become a slur, a brand, whispered with a mixture of revulsion and terror. The HPSC fought back not with truth, but with volume. News channels, on a tight government leash, ran non-stop coverage of daring hero exploits from other prefectures. Charismatic heroes gave canned interviews about public safety and vigilance against destabilizing villain factions who were supposedly using new chemical agents. It was a desperate, frantic attempt to change the channel, to distract a populace that was staring at a crack forming in the very foundation of their reality. It wasn't working. Trust was hemorrhaging. Izuku felt the city's fear as a constant, grinding static against his danger sense. He'd spent the day after the subway incident in a forced medical leave, his body a tapestry of stinging cuts and scrapes, his mind a chaotic mess. His agency had fielded hundreds of calls from the Commission, ranging from commendations for his non-lethal containment to stern reprimands for his unorthodox methods and the damage to his costume. He ignored them all. His actions on the subway platform had been a declaration of intent, a line drawn in the sand not with words, but with his own bleeding body. He was sitting in his small agency office, a glorified cubicle with a window overlooking the frantic city, when it happened. The news anchor on the wall-mounted screen was interviewing Empty Lady about a recent bank robbery when her face froze mid-sentence. The screen dissolved into a cascade of harsh, digital static, a sound like a million cicadas screaming at once. Every screen in the office, from the main monitor to the small data slate on his desk, did the same. Across the city, across the entire nation, every television, phone, and public jumbotron was being simultaneously hijacked. The static coalesced, swirling into a stark, elegant symbol, a stylized tree, its branches reaching upwards like arms in supplication, its roots twisting down into a perfect, double helix spiral of DNA. It was biological, geometric, and deeply unsettling. Then, a voice filled the air. It was calm, articulate, and carried a strange, melodic cadence. It was a voice designed to soothe, which made the words it spoke infinitely more terrifying. Citizens of Japan. People of the world, the voice began. Please do not be alarmed. The chaos on your screens is merely a reflection of the chaos in your blood. The image shifted from the symbol to a person. They stood in what looked like a sterile, white laboratory, bathed in soft, clinical light. The figure was tall and slender, clad in a simple, high-collared white coat, like a scientist or a doctor. Their face was completely hidden by a smooth, porcelain mask, devoid of any feature save for intricate, dark green filigree that branched out from the edges like creeping ivy. It was a serene, beautiful, and utterly inhuman visage. You are afraid, the masked figure continued, their posture relaxed, their hands clasped gently before them. You have seen the videos. You have heard the whispers. You look at your own hands, the very source of your uniqueness and power, and you see a ticking clock. Your heroes and your government offer you lies. They speak of villains and chemical attacks because they are terrified of the truth. The truth is that this is not an attack. This is an awakening. Izuku stood up, his half-eaten katsudon forgotten on his desk. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The source. They call it Quirk singularity decay, the figure said, a hint of amusement in their voice. A clumsy, fearful term for a glorious process. They see a disease. I see a metamorphosis. They see an ending. I see a beginning. For over a century, humanity has been burdened by a fragile, unstable graft. Quirks. Powerful, yes, but imperfect. Unstable. We have reached the limits of this fragile symbiosis. The human body, in its primitive wisdom, is finally trying to cast off the parasite. And the parasite, in its own bid for survival, is fighting to become the host. On the screen, A holographic display shimmered into existence beside the masked figure. It showed a strand of DNA, then a glowing quirk factor bonding to it imperfectly. Then, it showed the quirk factor beginning to overwrite the DNA, the process Kenjiwara had described. "This agony you have witnessed," the figure said, their voice softening with mock pity, "is the pain of birth. It is violent. It is messy. But it is necessary. Our stagnant society, built on the coddling of the genetically weak and the arbitrary morality of heroes and villains, has prevented our evolution. It has preserved the flawed branches, the withered leaves. I am here to correct that. I am the gardener, and it is time to prune the dead wood so that the forests may thrive." A cold dread, colder than any fear he'd felt in battle, washed over Izuku. This wasn't a ranting maniac. This was a zealot, an ideologue with a monstrous, coherent philosophy. "The events you have seen were not random," the gardener confessed, the admission sending a fresh wave of panic through the invisible audience. "The process of QSD is inevitable, a slow, creeping rot. I have merely accelerated it. I have developed a catalyst. A resonant frequency that targets those with specific, unstable genetic markers, the weakest links in our collective chain. I am not a murderer. I am a midwife to a new age, helping humanity shed its weak and fragile skin. I am not a villain who seeks to destroy your society. I am the Messiah you did not know you needed, here to save you from yourselves." The broadcast sent a shockwave through the city. In a sports bar downtown, a man dropped his beer, his gaze falling to his own hands, which could emit weak sparks. In a high-rise office, a woman backed away from her coworker, whose quirk let him talk to squirrels. In the Bakugo family home, Katsuki stared at the television, his hands clenched so tight his palms began to smoke. "Some messiah," he snarled, a low, guttural sound of pure rage. "Just another damn monster who needs to be blown to hell." The gardener raised a single, gloved finger. "The HPSC and your heroes will offer you violence. They will call my beautiful children aberrations and seek to neutralize them. They offer you only the butcher's cleaver. I, on the other hand, offer you a future. A stronger, purer, more perfect humanity, forged in the crucible of this necessary pain. Do not fight the change. Embrace it, for this is not the end. It is merely the end of the world as you know it." The screen went black. A moment later, the flustered face of the news anchor returned. We are experiencing technical difficulties," she stammered, her professional composure utterly shattered. But no one was listening. The manifesto had been delivered. The poison was in the water supply. Izuku stood frozen in his office, the calm, melodic voice of the gardener echoing in his ears. The butcher's cleaver. That's what Protocol Chimera was. A brutal, panicked reaction, and the gardener was using it, banking on it, to legitimize their own horrifying crusade. They were two sides of the same terrible coin. One wanted to kill the victims out of fear, the other saw their suffering as a necessary tool for purification. And he was standing in the middle, alone. All Might's words came back to him. Your belief is the very soul of heroism. He couldn't do this alone. The HPSC was compromised by their own fear. Endeavor was blinded by his brutal pragmatism. Hawks was trapped by his loyalty to the system. He needed a different kind of team, a team built not on power rankings or government sanction, but on a shared, unshakable belief. They were there to save people. All of them. His mind, the same analytical engine that broke down quirks in his notebooks, began to assemble his team. He didn't need soldiers. He needed saviors. His first call was not to a hero, but to a genius. The UE Support Course Labs had always been a place of controlled chaos, but May Hatsum's personal workshop was a glorious, multi-level testament to inspired insanity. Blueprints were plastered over every available surface, half-finished babies littered the floor, and the air hummed with the energy of a dozen different power sources. Izuku found May hanging upside down from a ceiling-mounted harness, soldering a connection on a device that looked like a cross between a satellite dish and a pressure cooker. Her pink, cross-her-pupiled eyes zoomed in on him as he entered. Deku! She shouted, her voice muffled by a protective mask. Perfect timing. Take a look at this baby. A portable, high-yield plasma condenser. I figured you could use it to, punch harder. What do you think? Handsome, I need your help, Izuku said, cutting straight to the point. He had no time for pleasantries. Mei unclipped her harness and landed on the floor with a clatter of tools hanging from her belt. She pushed her goggles up onto her forehead. Help? You got it. What's the problem? Need your suit reinforced? I have a new carbon nanoweave polymer that can withstand. No, Izuku interrupted, holding up a hand. It's bigger than that. I need you to analyze an energy signature. A biological one. It's rewriting human DNA at the cellular level. It's unstable, chaotic, and unique to every individual it affects. I need a way to scan it, to understand it. And I need technology to contain it. Non-lethally. Something that can adapt to different quirk types, thermal, kinetic, spatial, biological. He had expected her to be confused, maybe even scared. Instead, her eyes widened, the crosshairs dilating with an almost manic glee. A bioenergy signature, overriding cellular structure? She repeated, her voice dropping to an excited whisper. Unstable, chaotic, and unique to each host? Deku, that's not a problem. That's the most beautiful engineering challenge I've ever heard of. She scrambled over a pile of scrap metal and grabbed a data slate, her fingers already flying across the screen. The energy resonance. I need a multiphasic scanner, something that can read beyond the standard EM spectrum. We could start with the principles of a medical MRI but overclock the sensor array to detect quantum-level fluctuations. And for containment, oh, my babies will love this. Not a cage, no, that's too simple. A null field generator. Something that can create a localized bubble of reality where quirk expression is dampened, or maybe a dynamic stasis field that matches the aberrations, the patient's, energy output and neutralizes it with a counter frequency. The possibilities are endless. She looked up at him, her face alight with pure, unadulterated passion. She hadn't asked if it was dangerous. She hadn't asked if it was sanctioned. She had only seen the impossible problem and thrown herself at it. I'm in, she declared. But I'll need resources. My lab, full funding, and no pencil pushers from the commission telling me my babies are unsafe for field testing. You'll have it, Izuku promised, a small weight lifting from his chest. He had his brilliant, chaotic engineer. He had his tech. Next, he needed a heart. He found Ochako Uraraka in the 3A dormitory common room. She was watching the news, her expression a mixture of sadness and frustration. The footage of panicked civilians was on a loop. When she saw Izuku, she immediately turned the screen off. Deku, she said, her voice soft. Are you okay? Your fight at the subway station, you were all over the internal hero network. I'm fine, Uraraka. But the situation isn't, he said, sitting down across from her. He decided to be completely honest. There could be no secrets. The HPSC has a new protocol. They're going to start using lethal force. And this? Gardner, they're going to keep triggering more outbreaks. Ochako's hands clenched in her lap. So they're just going to give up on them? On the victims? They see it as triage. A necessary evil to maintain order, Izuku explained, the words tasting like poison. I can't accept that. I won't. I'm going to find another way. A way to save them, but I'm going against the commission. I'll be operating outside the law. It's dangerous, and I can't order anyone to do it with me. He looked her in the eyes, his own pleading. Uraraka, your quirk is about negating a fundamental force. You make things weightless. You bring people down to safety. More than that, you've always put civilian rescue and saving people first. I need that. I need someone who, when they look at a monster, still sees the person inside. I need someone to help me save the people caught in the crossfire, to manage evacuations, and to remind me what we're fighting for. But I have to ask, are you willing to take that risk with me? Ochako didn't hesitate for a second. A fierce, determined light ignited in her warm brown eyes. Deku, she said, her voice ringing with absolute conviction. When we were first years, I said I wanted to be a hero to help my parents. That's still true. But since then, I've learned that being a hero means helping everyone, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. What's the point of our licenses, of our training, if we just stand by and let people be executed because it's easier. She stood up and offered him a hand, not to help him up, but as a pledge. Of course, I'm with you. That's what heroes do. We save people. Izuku took her hand, a genuine, grateful smile touching his lips for the first time in days. He had his conscience. He had his heart. Finally, he needed his shield. His rock. Shoto Todoroki was in the training grounds, running through drills with a stoic intensity. One side of the field was a jagged mountain range of gleaming ice, the other was shimmering with heat haze. He stopped the moment he saw Izuku approach, melting his ice structures into pools of clean water with a quiet hiss. Midoriya, he acknowledged, his mismatched eyes studying Izuku's face with unnerving perception. You have that look. The one you get when you're about to do something reckless and noble. Izuku managed a weak chuckle. Is it that obvious? To me, it is, Shoto said simply. It's the gardener, isn't it? And my father's response. Izuku nodded. Endeavor wants to use overwhelming force. The HPSC agrees. I'm building a team to pursue a different option, non-lethal containment, and finding a cure. He didn't need to give Shoto the same impassioned speech he'd given Ochako. Shoto understood the pitfalls of overwhelming, destructive force better than anyone. He had lived it. My father sees every problem as a nail that must be hammered with fire, Shoto said, his tone flat but with an undercurrent of old bitterness. He believes strength is the only answer. He's wrong. He was wrong when he trained me, and he's wrong now. Using fire to stop a forest fire only burns more of the forest. This is a problem that requires ice. Precision. Control. He looked Izuku in the eye, his expression unwavering. My father's methods created a monster in his own home. I will not stand by and watch his philosophy turn our country into a hunting ground for the sick and the scared. What do you need me to do? The relief was so profound it almost made Izuku's knees buckle. Shoto's immense power, wielded with control and a desire to protect rather than destroy, was the perfect tool. He could create massive ice walls for evacuations, flash freeze unstable aberrations without killing them, and control environments on a scale few others could manage. I need you to be our shield, Izuku said. I need you to help me contain these outbreaks, to protect civilians, to give Mei the time she needs to work. I need your control, Shoto. You have it, Shoto said without a flicker of doubt. He had his heavy artillery. He had his immovable shield. They established their base of operations in one of UA's decommissioned support labs, a dusty, cavernous space that Mei Hatsum immediately claimed as her new palace of innovation. It was secure, off the HPSC's grid, and filled with enough raw materials and power conduits to fuel Mei's frantic genius. Uraraka began drawing up emergency evacuation plans for different urban densities, while Todoroki started theorizing large-scale ice structures that could be deployed from a distance. For the first time, a sliver of hope cut through the oppressive gloom in Izuku's heart. He wasn't alone anymore. The hope lasted for 6 hours. Just as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city, the gardener broadcasted again. This time, there was no preamble, no philosophy. Just the serene, porcelain mask and the calm, chilling voice. The time for words is over. The time for cultivation has begun, the voice announced, and a map appeared on screen, a single ward highlighted in a sickening, pulsating green. It was a dense, residential area known for its community gardens and green spaces, a sick, final irony. In 24 hours, my catalyst will be released in the Kyosu ward. The seeds of evolution will be sown, and we will all witness the first harvest of a new humanity. I invite the heroes of Japan to watch, see the futility of your methods. See the glorious, painful, beautiful truth of what is to come. The broadcast cut out. In the dusty, repurposed lab, the 4 of them stood in silence. The map of Kyosu ward glowed on their main monitor, a ticking time bomb. They were a team of 4, a boy with a borrowed godlike power, a girl who could defy gravity, a boy who wielded the elements, and a mad genius with a box of scraps. They were outlaws, operating on a prayer and a shared conviction. And they had 24 hours to stop a self-proclaimed messiah from turning an entire city district into a garden of biological horrors. Izuku looked at the determined faces of his friends, at the chaotic brilliance of Mei's workshop, and his resolve hardened into diamond. "All right," he said, his voice quiet but ringing with the power of the symbol he was destined to be. "Let's get to work." 24 hours. The number echoed in Izuku's mind like a funeral bell. 720,000 seconds. A single rotation of the planet. And at the end of it, the gardener promised a harvest. Kyosu Ward, a district known for its quiet neighborhoods and the sprawling, state-of-the-art Mutations General Hospital complex, was the designated field. The team's secret base, the affectionately nicknamed Hatsum's Playhouse of Horrors, became a maelstrom of focused activity. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, hot metal, and Uraraka's stress-brewed, tar-like coffee, while the HPSC scrambled to establish a clumsy, heavy-handed quarantine around the ward, squad cars blocking roads, helicopters droning overhead, creating more panic than they prevented. Izuku's small, rogue unit worked on a plan born of desperation and ingenuity. May Hatsum was a force of nature. Fueled by an unholy combination of caffeine, high-energy protein bars, and pure, unadulterated passion, she worked tirelessly. She had cobbled together a prototype scanner, a clunky, briefcase-sized device bristling with antennas and wires that she dubbed the Quirk Factor Resonance Imager, or QFRI. "It's a baby, but it's a beautiful baby," she'd declared, her goggles perched on her forehead, her face smudged with grease. "It won't give us a cure, not yet, but it should be able to detect the catalyst's frequency. If we can pinpoint the source of the broadcast, we might be able to shut it down before it activates." Uraraka, meanwhile, was their strategic heart. With a map of Kyosu Ward spread across a massive workbench, she cross-referenced census data, public transport schedules, and architectural blueprints. The gardener said their catalyst targets specific genetic markers, she reasoned, her finger tracing the outline of the hospital. Hospitals are a high-risk area. They're full of people with compromised immune systems, pre-existing conditions, and a high concentration of diverse, and sometimes volatile quirks. If I were a bioterrorist wanting to make a statement, this would be ground zero. Shoto stood beside her, his expression grim. A hospital is a nightmare scenario for containment. Narrow corridors, vulnerable non-combatants on every floor. Using large-scale fire or ice is almost impossible without causing catastrophic collateral damage. Then we don't use large-scale attacks, Izuku said, his voice firm. He was running drills in a cleared-out corner of the lab, practicing fine control with Black Whip, weaving intricate patterns in the air, his movements fluid and precise. We focus on evacuation and targeted, non-lethal intervention. Uraraka, you and I will lead the evacuation teams. Shoto, you'll be our area denial, create barriers, guide people, and be ready to flash freeze any localized outbreaks if you can do it safely. May, you're our eyes and ears. Find me the source of that catalyst. It was a plan built on hope and shoestring logic, but it was their plan. It was a plan to save, not to sanitize. As the clock ticked down, a detail from Uraraka's research sent a spear of ice through Izuku's chest. "Izuku," she said, her voice hesitant. She turned her datapad towards him. On the screen was a visitor log from Mutations General. "I was checking for any high-risk individuals or heroes who might be in the area. Look!" His eyes fell on a name, and the world seemed to tilt. Kota Koji. Visitor pass, issued 8 a.m. Destination, maternity ward, floor 3. Visiting his older sister, who had just given birth to a healthy baby boy, Koji Kota. Their gentle, soft-spoken classmate. Anima. The hero whose connection to the animal kingdom was so profound, so pure, that he often seemed more at home with birds and squirrels than with people. Izuku's mind flashed back to their time at UA, to Kota's shy smile, the way he would blush and speak in stutters when forced to talk, but could command an army of insects with a quiet, confident murmur. His quirk, an e-voice, was a deep, empathic link to the biological world. His quirk. Izuku breathed, his danger sense tingling with a dreadful premonition. It's a biological communication quirk. It connects him directly to other living things. If the gardener's catalyst is a biological frequency, he didn't need to finish the sentence. A quirk that made its user an antenna for all living things would be uniquely, horrifyingly vulnerable to a signal designed to rewrite life itself. He's a primary target, Shoto stated, his voice devoid of emotion, but his eyes dark with concern. We have to get him out of there first. The mission had just become deeply, painfully personal. With 4 hours to go, they moved. Under the cover of the pre-dawn gloom, they slipped past the HPSC quarantine line with practiced ease. Shoto created a momentary ice fog, and Uraraka made them weightless, allowing them to drift over a checkpoint like ghosts. They were outlaws now, operating in the shadow of the very system they had sworn to uphold. Kyosu Ward was a ghost town. The HPSC's heavy-handed lockdown had driven most residents indoors, leaving the streets eerily empty. The only sign of life was the hospital complex, a sprawling behemoth of glass and steel, its lights blazing against the darkening sky. They set up a temporary command post on the roof of an adjacent building. May immediately began assembling the QFRI, its antenna unfolding like a mechanical flower. "Okay, baby, let's find that nasty signal," she muttered, her fingers flying across a keyboard. Izuku, Uraraka, and Shoto stood at the edge of the roof, looking at the hospital. "Koda's sister is in the East Wing maternity ward," Uraraka said, pointing. "3rd floor. We go in quiet, get him and his family, and get them out before the deadline." "Split up," Izuku ordered. "Uraraka, you're with me. Shoto, stay on the perimeter. Be ready to create diversions or containment barriers. We don't know where the gardener will deploy the catalyst from. It could be anywhere." Shoto nodded, a thin layer of frost already creeping over his right arm in anticipation. Entering the hospital was like stepping into a bubble of surreal normality. Inside, the city's panic hadn't fully penetrated. Nurses bustled down corridors, doctors spoke in low, reassuring tones, and the gentle chime of the PA system announced visiting hours. It was an island of calm, and Izuku knew with a sickening certainty that it was about to be washed away. They moved quickly, keeping to the staff corridors. They found the maternity ward without incident. The air here was filled with a different kind of energy, joy, relief, the quiet wonder of new life. It was a stark, brutal contrast to what was about to happen. They found the room. Through the small window in the door, they saw a beautiful, heart-wrenching scene. Koda's older sister was propped up in bed, holding a tiny, sleeping bundle. Her husband stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. And sitting in a chair, holding one of the baby's impossibly small hands in his own large one, was Koji Koda. He was beaming. It was a smile of such pure, unadulterated joy that it transformed his usually shy features. A small bluebird was perched on his shoulder, chirping a soft melody, a clear violation of hospital policy that no one in the room seemed to mind. He was whispering to the baby, his uneven voice a soft, gentle murmur, not of command, but of welcome. Izuku's heart broke. He was about to shatter this perfect moment. He knocked softly on the door and entered. Koda looked up, his smile faltering in surprise. "And Midoriya-kun? Uraraka-san? What are you?" "Koda, we need you and your family to come with us, right now," Izuku said, his voice low and urgent. "There's going to be an incident. The hospital isn't safe." Koda's brow furrowed in confusion. His sister looked alarmed. "An incident? What kind of incident? Is it a villain?" Before Izuku could explain, a shrill, piercing tone cut through the air. It wasn't a sound that came from the hallway or outside the window. It felt like it was originating from inside their own skulls, a high-frequency whine that vibrated behind the eyes. May's voice screamed through their earpieces. "It's on! I've got the signal! It's everywhere! It's not one source, it's a network!" Small broadcast nodes, hidden all over the ward, on the roof, in the ventilation system. "Oh God, Deku, it's a web!" The effect was instantaneous. Throughout the hospital, a wave of agony erupted. A scream from the room next door, a crash from down the hall. But in their room, the horror was intimate. The small bluebird on Koda's shoulder shrieked, a terrible, unnatural sound, and fell to the floor, convulsing. And Koji Koda began to scream. It was not a sound of fear. It was a sound of overload, of a dam breaking. He clutched his head, his joyful expression contorting into a mask of unimaginable pain. His Quirk, his beautiful, gentle Ani voice, had become a two-way conduit for a signal of pure biological chaos. "It hurts," he gasped, his eyes rolling back in his head. "So loud." They're all screaming, "Koda!" Izuku yelled, rushing forward, but it was too late. The transformation began. It started not with his body, but with the environment around him. The potted plant in the corner of the room began to grow at an impossible rate. Thick, thorny vines snaked out from its pot, wrapping around the bedposts, cracking the plaster on the walls. The flowers on the bedside table bloomed and withered in a matter of seconds, their petals turning black and dissolving into a foul-smelling sludge. Koda fell to his knees, his body trembling violently. His skin took on a strange, bark-like texture. Green, vein-like lines spread up his arms, glowing with a sickly light. His fingers elongated, twisting into what looked like wooden roots. "Get them out! Now!" Izuku roared at Uraraka. Uraraka, her face pale with terror but her resolve absolute, grabbed Koda's sister and her husband. "Come on! We have to go!" She tapped the hospital bed, making it weightless, and began pushing it out of the rapidly transforming room. Izuku turned back to Koda. His friend was disappearing. A thick, woody carapace was forming over his torso, his hero costume tearing and falling away. Moss began to grow in patches on his skin, but the worst part was the sound. From his throat came a constant, choked sob, a sound of utter despair. He was still in there, trapped within the prison of his own rampaging quirk. "Koda, fight it!" Izuku pleaded, reaching for him. As his hand got close, a thick, thorny vine whipped out from Koda's back and lashed across Izuku's arm, tearing through his costume and leaving a deep, bleeding gash. It wasn't an attack. It was a reflex, like a nerve twitching. The growth accelerated. The floorboards around Koda buckled and split as thick, gnarled roots burst through, anchoring him to the building's foundation. More vines erupted from his body, smashing the window, crawling out into the open air like questing tentacles. The room was no longer a room. It was becoming a monstrous, living jungle. From the center of the chaotic growth, Koda looked up. His eyes, once so gentle, were now wide, vacant pools of green energy. A single tear, thick and sap-like, rolled down his bark-like cheek. He opened his mouth, but it wasn't his voice that came out. It was a chorus, a symphony of organic noise, the chittering of a billion insects, the roar of a stampeding herd, the groaning of ancient wood, all twisted into a single, discordant chord of agony. His quirk was no longer just speaking to life. It was now screaming with the corrupted voice of life itself. Outside, Shoto saw the explosion of green from the third floor. "Deku, report. What's happening?" He yelled into his comms. The vines were spreading, covering the side of the hospital like a cancerous growth. They pulsed with a sickly green light, and from them bloomed horrifying, flesh-like flowers that pulsed and wept a corrosive nectar. Small, monstrous creatures, things that looked like a grotesque fusion of insect and mammal, began to crawl out from the foliage, skittering down the walls. The hospital wing was being terraformed, turned into a pocket dimension of biological nightmare. Izuku backed away slowly, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. The room was gone. His friend was gone. In his place was the epicenter of a silent, weeping forest, a monstrous, tragic god of a corrupted natural world. The sheer despair radiating from the creature that was once Koji Koda was a physical force, a wave of sorrow so profound it made Izuku's own soul ache. He stood in the hallway, the screams of other patients and the chaos of the hospital a distant roar. All he could see was the thing in the room, the monstrous, yet sorrowful form of his friend, a silent king on a throne of thorns, weeping tears of sap, his fist clenched, his own blood dripping from the gash on his arm onto the floor. The HPSC would see this as a level 10 biohazard. Endeavor would see a target to be incinerated. The gardener would see a successful harvest. But Izuku Midoriya saw his friend, Koji Koda, trapped and alone in the dark. A raw, primal rage, colder and deeper than any he had ever felt, burned away his fear. It was the rage of a savior faced with an unspeakable tragedy. He activated his comms, his voice a low, dangerous growl that cut through the panic. "Shoto, Uraraka, evacuate the east wing completely. Get everyone out. May, shut down those nodes if you can, but the priority has changed. Deku, what are you going to do?" Uraraka's panicked voice crackled back. Izuku looked into the heart of the silent, growing forest, at the weeping god on his throne of pain. He made a vow, not just to the thing in the room, but to the memory of the boy it had consumed. "I will save you, Coda," he whispered, the words a sacred oath. Then, louder, into the comms, his voice ringing with an iron resolve that left no room for argument, "I'll save you all." The hospital had become a war zone. Not of good versus evil, but of order versus chaos. Uraraka was a whirlwind of motion, her quirk a godsend. She made gurneys and fleeing patients weightless, guiding them through corridors that were beginning to twist and warp, the floors covered in slick moss and grasping roots. Shoto, from the outside, sent massive, controlled walls of ice to form barriers, creating safe corridors and cutting off the spread of the monstrous flora, his face a grim mask of concentration, but the growth was relentless. The wing of the hospital was now almost completely encased in a pulsating, organic mass. The silent forest, as the panicked HPSC observers were starting to call it, was expanding. Izuku stood at the edge of the quarantine zone Shoto had established, 100-foot thick wall of ice that sizzled and cracked where it met the encroaching alien jungle. He was staring at his problem. He couldn't punch a forest. He couldn't smash a biological process. His mind raced, cycling through the quirks of One for All, through every piece of training, every battle he had ever fought. He thought of his fight with Lady Nagant, using FA gene to store energy and release it in bursts of speed. He thought of his fight with Shigaraki, the constant, shifting application of multiple quirks at once. He thought of what he'd done for Tanaka, using gear shift to impose order on a chaotic liquid. The gardener's catalyst was a frequency. A signal. It had resonated with Koda's quirk and turned it into an amplifier. But what if a frequency could be countered? What if a vibration could be cancelled out by another vibration? It was a theory, a wild, insane leap of logic. But it was all he had. He needed to build up energy. A lot of it. "Shoto!" he yelled into his comms. "I have an idea, but I need you to buy me time. Don't let anything cross the ice wall. Nothing gets in or out." "Understood," came the clipped, reliable reply. Izuku backed away from the ice wall, planting his feet firmly on the asphalt of the hospital parking lot. He closed his eyes, shutting out the chaos, the screams, the sight of his transformed friend. He reached inward, into the stardusted nexus of One for All. He focused on FA gene, the quirk of the third user. The power to build up and store kinetic energy through repeated motion. He began to move, not in a frantic battle-ready stance, but in a slow, deliberate pattern. It was a kata, a series of controlled, repetitive motions, like a martial artist in deep meditation. He moved his arms in slow circles, bent his knees, shifted his weight. With every movement, he felt the crackle of kinetic energy building within his muscles, a low hum that grew in intensity. Green lightning began to arc across his body, brighter and more intense than ever before. He was a living battery, a capacitor being charged with the godlike power of One for All. The ground beneath his feet began to crack under the strain of the energy he was containing. "Not enough," rumbled the voice of the third user in his mind. "More. You are not preparing for a punch. You are trying to ring a bell the size of a building." Izuku pushed himself harder. His muscles screamed. His lungs burned. The energy he was storing was immense, a physical weight that threatened to tear him apart. He could feel every cell in his body vibrating, humming with a power that no normal human was ever meant to contain. He was a bomb, ready to detonate. He opened his eyes. They were no longer just green, they were blazing emerald furnaces. He looked at the monstrous forest, at the epicenter where he knew Koda was trapped. This was it. He wasn't going to punch. He was going to release. FA gene, resonant pulse. He roared, his voice shaking the very air. He slammed his hands together, not in an attack, but in a focused release. He didn't let the kinetic energy explode outwards as a shockwave. Instead, guided by an instinct born of desperation and the collected wisdom of the vestiges, he shaped it. He released all the stored energy in a single, conceptual pulse. A wave of pure, kinetic vibration, tuned not to destroy, but to disrupt. He aimed it directly at the heart of the forest, a counter-frequency to the gardener's song of corruption. The pulse was invisible, but its effect was cataclysmic. A wave of visible distortion rippled through the air, striking the organic mass of the silent forest. There was no explosion. Instead, there was a sound, a deep, groaning, resonant thrum, like the striking of a colossal tuning fork. The effect on the forest was immediate. The sickly green glow that pulsed through the vines and roots flickered violently. The monstrous creatures skittering along the walls froze, then crumbled into dust. The flesh-like flowers withered, turning brown and brittle. The relentless, aggressive growth shuddered to a halt. It wasn't a cure. It hadn't reversed the damage. The hospital wing was still a ruin, encased in dead, twisted wood. But the process, the chaotic, rampaging energy, had been arrested. Stabilized. He had rung the bell, and its clear tone had, for a moment, silenced the chaotic noise. Deep within the withered heart of the deadwood, a single, soft sob could be heard. It was human. It was Koda's. Izuku fell to one knee, his body spent, every muscle screaming. He was panting, sweat pouring down his face. He had done it. He had found a way. But as he looked up, he saw the flashing red and blue lights of a dozen HPSC vehicles screaming towards his position, their sirens wailing. Above, a figure hovered, his wings of brilliant red catching the light. Hawks. And he did not look happy. Izuku had saved his friend from his own quirk. Now, he had to save him from the heroes. The silence that followed the resonant pulse was more deafening than any explosion. The chaotic symphony of corrupted life had ceased, replaced by the groan of stressed metal from the hospital's frame and the hiss of melting ice from Shoto's rapidly receding barriers. The silent forest was no longer a vibrant, terrifying engine of growth. It was a dead, blackened husk, a grotesque monument of wood and thorn wrapped around the hospital's east wing like a skeletal hand. Izuku was on one knee, his breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. The release of that much-focused energy had scoured him from the inside out. His arms felt like they were filled with static, and a high-pitched ringing echoed in his ears. But through it all, he could feel a change in the ambient thrum of his danger sense. The chaotic, agonizing spike that had been Koda was gone, replaced by a low, weak, and deeply sorrowful throb. He was still there. He was stable. The moment of relief was shattered by the shriek of tires on asphalt. A convoy of HPSC vehicles screeched to a halt, forming a semicircle around the devastated area. Armored vans disgorged dozens of figures in stark white, full-body biohazard suits. They were the sanitizer squads, the Commission's new, grim-faced answer to the QSD crisis. They carried not rescue equipment, but heavy, weaponized gear, foam sprayers designed to encase targets in quick-hardening resin, high-frequency sonic cannons, and what looked terrifyingly like military-grade flamethrowers. They moved with cold, impersonal efficiency, establishing a perimeter, their movements sharp and precise. They weren't here to rescue. They were here to cleanse. Hovering above them all, his red wings beating a slow, powerful rhythm against the smoke-filled air, was Hawks. He descended, landing with a soft thud a few yards from Izuku. His usual carefree expression was gone, replaced by a mask of hardened professionalism and deep-seated frustration. "Deku," he said, his voice sharp. "What have you done?" Before Izuku could answer, a voice like grinding gravel cut through the air. "He's done enough." Endeavor strode through the lines of sanitizer troops, his body wreathed in a low, intense flame that made the air around him shimmer. His face was a thunderous mask of fury and grim determination. He didn't even look at Izuku. His gaze was fixed on the dead forest, on the gaping hole where a hospital wing used to be. "Protocol Chimera is in full effect," Endeavor bellowed, his voice carrying to every hero and officer on the scene. "This entire structure is a level 10 biohazard. The aberration at its core is contained, but not neutralized. Sanitizer teams, prepare for systematic cleansing. We will incinerate the growth from the outside in. Once we have a clear path to the epicenter, the target will be neutralized. Permanently." The order was cold, absolute, and to Izuku, utterly monstrous. "No," he said, his voice quiet but firm. He pushed himself to his feet, his body screaming in protest. He staggered slightly, but his stance was defiant. He planted himself directly in the path between Endeavor and the ruined hospital wing. Endeavor finally turned his blazing turquoise eyes on him. "Get out of the way, Deku. This is not a debate." "I said no," Izuku repeated, his voice gaining strength. He met the number one hero's glare without flinching. There is a person in there. A hero. Our classmate. He is not a target to be neutralized. He is a victim, and he is alive. A murmur went through the assembled HPSC troops. Some of the younger heroes on the perimeter, who had arrived as backup, looked on with wide, uncertain eyes. This was not just a disagreement. This was the number 2 hero openly, publicly defying the number 1 hero and a direct HPSC order. He is a catalyst for a biological disaster that has destroyed a city block and endangered thousands of lives. Endeavor shot back, taking a threatening step forward. The heat rolling off him intensified. My son is exhausted from containing it, Uravity is traumatized from evacuating it, and you are half dead from whatever that light show was. This ends now, before it can restart. It won't restart, Izuku insisted, his mind racing. He had to make them understand. The gardener's catalyst, it's a frequency. It caused a runaway reaction in Koda's quirk. I used the counter frequency. I stabilized him. He's not a threat anymore. He's just trapped. Hawk stepped forward, placing a hand on Endeavor's shoulder. He might be right, Endeavor. His methods are insane, but the growth has stopped. The energy signature has dropped by 90%. Maybe we can afford a moment to reassess. Reassess? Endeavor snarled, shaking off Hawk's hand. Look at this. This is what comes from hesitation. This is what comes from your soft-hearted, save everyone philosophy, Deku. Triage. Sometimes you have to cut off the limb to save the body. This is a hard lesson, but it's one you need to learn if you want to bear the responsibility of that power. The condescension, the absolute certainty in Endeavor's voice that his brutal calculus was the only path, ignited a spark of cold fury in Izuku. I will not learn a lesson that teaches me to kill my friends, Izuku said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. Green lightning, weak but defiant, began to flicker around his bruised and battered form. This area is under my protection. I will not allow you to murder a hero who is scared and needs our help. You will not pass. It was a declaration of war. The air grew thick with tension. The sanitizer squads raised their weapons, their aim shifting from the hospital to the green-clad hero standing before it. Endeavor's flames flared, his face a mask of incandescent rage. He was being challenged, his authority and his entire worldview questioned in front of his subordinates by the one person he saw as his son's rival and the inheritor of All Might's naive idealism. So be it, Endeavor growled. If you want to protect a monster, we'll go through you. This is an act of insubordination and obstruction of a critical hero operation. You are relieved of duty, Deku. Stand down, or be removed. Izuku braced himself, channeling the last dregs of his strength. He knew he couldn't win. Not against Endeavor, Hawks, and 24 HPSC agents. Not in his current state. But he could delay them. He could be a shield, for as long as he lasted. I won't let you do it, he repeated, a final, desperate plea and a promise. Endeavor raised a hand, fire coalescing into a sphere of plasma. Final warning. Then, a new sound cut through the standoff. The roar of explosions, not from the fight, but from the sky. A figure was rocketing towards them, propelled by a series of perfectly controlled blasts. You think I'm gonna let you be the only one to be a hero, you damn nerd? Katsuki Bakugo landed with a deafening boom between Izuku and Endeavor's forces, his landing cracking the asphalt beneath his boots. He didn't look at Izuku. His feral, crimson gaze was locked on Endeavor, his lips pulled back in a trademark snarl. His gauntlets were smoking, and his entire posture screamed explosive violence. Kaken? Izuku breathed, his voice a mixture of shock and overwhelming relief. Shut up, Deku, Bakugo snarled without turning. You look like crap. Just stand there and try not to fall over. He took a half step forward, placing himself slightly in front of Izuku, a silent, aggressive act of shielding. Endeavor stared at the newcomer, his rage momentarily replaced by disbelief. Dynamite. What is the meaning of this? You are interfering with an official. I'm interfering with you trying to roast one of our classmates. Bakugo shot back, his hands sparking. I heard your order over the comms. Neutralize the target. You talking about Round Face? Four Eyes? You talking about Koji? You want to kill him, you old bastard, You can try going through me first. Hawks let out a low groan. Oh, for the love of, not him too. Bakugo's arrival changed the entire dynamic. Izuku's defiance was ideological, a moral stand. Bakugo's was a visceral, violent rejection of authority. He wasn't making a philosophical argument. He was daring them to a fight. And everyone on that field knew that a fight with a full power, unrestrained dynamite was not something to be taken lightly. He was a force of nature, every bit as much as Endeavor. Bakugo, you are making a grave mistake, Endeavor warned, his voice dangerously low. Yeah, well, it won't be my first, Bakugo retorted, flexing his fingers. A series of small explosions popped from his palms like firecrackers. The way I see it, the giant plant monster has stopped moving. The only threat here now is you. So you can either stand down your pack of bleached white stormtroopers, or we can find out if your number 1 spot can handle an AP shot. The threat was blatant, insane, and utterly Bakugo. It was also a bluff, maybe. But with Bakugo, you could never be sure. The sanitizer squads shifted nervously. They were trained to handle rampaging aberrations, not 2 of the top 5 young heroes in the country, one of whom was a living artillery shell with a famously short fuse. This was the tipping point. The standoff was about to erupt into a full-blown battle between heroes. Izuku, standing behind Bakugo, felt a surge of strength from his friend's defiant presence. But he knew this couldn't be solved with more violence. He had to give them another option. An actual solution. His mind raced back to the pulse, to the theory. He had stabilized Koda, but he hadn't reached him. The dead forest was a physical barrier, a tomb. He needed to get inside. He needed to understand what had happened to his friend. He looked past the tense figures of Bakugo and Endeavor, his eyes scanning the blackened, thorny mass encasing the hospital. His new application of danger sense, the one Haikyuu Shinomori had been quietly teaching him to nurture, kicked in. It was more than just a warning of incoming attacks now. It was a subtle, extrasensory perception. He could feel the weak, sorrowful pulse of Koda's life force at the center of the husk. But he could also feel the structure of the husk itself. It was dense, interwoven, but his pulse had made it brittle. It was no longer living. It was just wood. Dead, incredibly thick wood. A new strategy, born from the combination of his power and Bakugo's sudden, violent arrival, began to form. Kaken, Izuku said, his voice clearer now, stronger. I need a path. Not a wide one. A focused one. Straight to the center. Bakugo half-turned, one crimson eye glaring at him. You got a plan, or are you just trying to get yourself killed faster? I have a plan, Izuku said with newfound certainty. My pulse stabilized him. It broke the connection to the gardener's signal. But he's trapped. I think I can communicate with him, but I have to get to him. He looked at the others, at Endeavor and Hawks, raising his voice so they could all hear. Don't you see? This is the answer. The gardener called them children, said they were being cultivated. They think this process is irreversible. They think the only options are to let them rampage or to kill them. But they're wrong. We can stabilize them. We can save them. Let me prove it. Give me 10 minutes. 10 minutes to do what? Get yourself killed? Endeavor scoffed. 10 minutes to bring back a hero, Izuku countered, his gaze unwavering. Bakugo let out a sharp, feral grin. You hear that, Sparky? 10 minutes. You can wait 10 damn minutes. He turned his attention to the wooden husk. All right, Deku. You want a path? You'll get the straightest, loudest, most destructive path you've ever seen. Tell me where. Izuku closed his eyes, focusing his danger sense. He pointed. There. 30 degrees up. Straight through to the core. Done, Bakugo said. He crouched, his body tensing like a compressed spring. AP shot, needle point. Instead of a wide, concussive blast, Bakugo focused his explosion into a single, hyper-concentrated beam. It was the technique he had used to pierce through Shigaraki's defenses. A searing lance of explosive energy erupted from his palm. It struck the deadwood husk with the force of a bunker-busting missile. The beam didn't shatter the structure, it drilled through it. Blackened wood and thorns vaporized in its path. In seconds it had carved a perfectly straight, man-sized tunnel that glowed cherry-red from the intense heat, leading directly into the dark heart of the silent forest. Pass open, nerd, Bakugo grunted, his arms smoking. Don't make me regret this. Izuku didn't waste a second. He shot forward, one for all flaring around him, and plunged into the tunnel before Endeavor or Hawks could even react. The inside of the tunnel was blisteringly hot, the air thick with the smell of carbonized wood and sap. It was a straight shot, about 50 yards long. At the end of it was a cavern, a hollow space at the center of the growth, the place that used to be a maternity ward room. Izuku emerged into the central chamber, and his breath caught in his throat. The space was a cathedral of dead wood. The thick, gnarled roots and vines had formed a dome-like structure. At the very center, where his friend had fallen, was a throne-like formation of twisted, blackened branches. And slumped in that throne, unmoving, was Koji Koda. The transformation was horrific, but it was incomplete. The resonant pulse had stopped at mid-process. His body was a tragic mosaic of man and plant. One arm was still his own, though pale and thin. The other was a gnarled limb of dark wood. His torso was covered in a thick, bark-like carapace, but patches of his skin were visible underneath. Moss grew in his hair, and a single, withered vine was wrapped around his leg. He was a living statue, trapped between two states of being. His head was bowed, and a quiet, choked sobbing, the sound Izuku had heard from outside, was the only sound in the chamber. Koda? Izuku said softly, taking a step forward. The sobbing stopped. Koda's head lifted slowly. His eyes were no longer glowing green voids. They were his own eyes, wide and filled with a despair so profound it was like looking into an abyss. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the sap that still occasionally wept from the bark on his cheeks. Midoriya, Kuin, he whispered, his voice a hoarse, scraping sound, like leaves skittering on pavement. It hurts. I can't feel what am I? He looked down at his own body, at the wooden limbs and the bark skin, and a fresh wave of horror and revulsion washed over his face. He began to tremble, and with the trembling, the dead wood around them began to vibrate. A faint green glow started to pulse from the carapace on his chest. His emotional state was tied to the quirk's stability. Despair and fear were making it flare up again. Koda, listen to me, Izuku said, taking another slow, careful step. He held his hands up, showing they were empty. It's okay. You're okay. I'm here. We're here to help you. Help me? Koda sobbed, the green glow intensifying. Look at me. I'm a monster. I destroyed my sister, the baby. Did I hurt them? No, Izuku said firmly, pouring as much conviction and honesty as he could into his voice. No, you didn't. Uraraka got them out. They're safe. Everyone is safe. You didn't hurt anyone, Koji. Using his first name was a gamble, an attempt to reach the boy, not the hero. It worked. Koda flinched, his tear-filled eyes widening. The green glow subsided slightly. You have to calm down, Izuku continued, his voice soft and soothing. I know you're scared. But you are not a monster. You are Koji Koda. You are the hero, Anima. You are my friend. Your quirk, it was hijacked. It wasn't your fault. He was only a few feet away now. He could feel the waves of self-loathing and terror coming off Koda like heat. He needed to anchor him, to give him something to hold on to. He thought of the vestiges, of Nana's words about his heart being his greatest weapon. He reached out his hand slowly, palm up. It's over, Koda. The signal is gone. It can't control you anymore. But you have to let go of the fear. It's feeding the last dregs of it. You have to believe me. You are still you. Koda stared at Izuku's outstretched hand. He looked from Izuku's determined, earnest face down to his own monstrous, wooden limb. The conflict in his eyes was a terrible thing to behold. Finally, hesitantly, he lifted his one remaining human hand. It trembled violently. He reached out and, with a choked sob, placed his hand in Izuku's. The moment they made contact, something shifted. Izuku felt it through one for all. A connection. He didn't just feel Koda's despair. He felt his friend's quirk, a tangled, broken, terrified thing. And he poured all of his own conviction, his own unwavering belief in heroism and hope, into that touch. It wasn't a quirk. It was just a connection, friend to friend, hero to hero. A silent message: you are not alone. I am here. You are not a monster. The last of the green glow faded from Koda's chest. The trembling stopped. The dead forest around them gave a final, shuddering groan and then fell completely still. Koji Koda slumped forward on his throne, his energy spent, and passed out, his human hand still held firmly in Izuku's grasp. Outside, the 10 minutes were almost up. Endeavor's patience had worn thin. Time's up, he growled, flames beginning to lick at his fists. Wait, Hawk said, holding up a hand. His eyes were narrowed, his head cocked as if listening for a faint sound. One of his feathers, sent to observe from a hidden perch near the tunnel, was feeding him information. The energy signatures inside, they've stabilized. All of them. There's no hostility. Just calm. As he spoke, Izuku emerged from the tunnel. He wasn't alone. He was supporting Koda, who was leaning heavily on him, unconscious. The sight was shocking. Koda was a disfigured, tragic figure, but he was undeniably a person, not a rampaging beast. He was a patient being helped by another hero. Izuku walked past the stunned Bakugo and didn't stop until he was standing before Endeavor again. He carefully lowered Koda to the ground, propping him up against his own legs. He looked up at the number 1 hero, his face smudged with soot, his body bruised, but his eyes blazing with a triumphant, righteous fire. This is not a monster, Izuku said, his voice clear and ringing through the silence. This is Koji Koda. A hero. A victim of the gardener. And proof. He gestured to the unconscious boy. Proof that there is another way. That we don't have to use your butcher's cleaver. We can save them. Protocol Chimera is wrong. Endeavor stared down at the scene. He saw Izuku, defiant and righteous. He saw Bakugo, silently daring him to make a move. He saw Shoto and Uraraka approaching, their faces set with the same determination. And he saw the disfigured but peaceful form of the boy he had been ready to incinerate. He saw the faces of the young heroes, the future of their profession, all united against him. He saw the irrefutable proof of their method's success, lying at his feet. For the first time in a very long time, Endeavor was silent. He looked at the ruin, at the boy, at the heroes arrayed against him, and the fire in his eyes flickered, the incandescent rage replaced by a flicker of deep, profound uncertainty. The line in the sand had been drawn, and for the first time, Endeavor was forced to wonder if he was standing on the wrong side of it.